I wrote the new textbook, Out of the Movement to the Masses. And in chapter 4, I talk about the case of Lynn Marcus. Lynn Marcus was a Trotskyite communist in New York City, and he eventually stopped being a communist, and he started his own thing called the LaRouche movement. His real name was Lyndon LaRouche. He started the LaRouche movement. But part of the reason he started his own movement was in the 60s, the left stopped believing in economic growth and started promoting degrowth. Lyndon LaRouche, being an economist and being somebody who was very involved in technology, he just couldn't accept that. And so he started his own communist group called the National Caucus of Labor Committees that was in New York City. And eventually they became their own thing, right? But when they were still communists, and I watched this, there's a series of classes about the history of the National Caucus of Labor Committees on the internet that I watched. A woman who was one of their founding members, a leader, a woman named Nancy Spanius or something like that. She talked about how when they were communists, one of the most common things that people would say to them from other communist groups would say to them, why are you always trying to save imperialism? All right, they would say, we look at your newspaper and you always have an economic plan to save the country, right? You want to set up a national bank. You want to, restore Glass-Steagall. You want to build these infrastructure projects. Why are you always trying to save the country? Why are you always trying to save the country when we know when we want to overthrow it? And they would say, well, why should the working class listen to us if we're trying to destroy the country that they live in? And if you looked back at the 1930s left, if you read William Z. Foster or the Communist Party back in the days when they were actually strong, they weren't trying to destroy the country. They had an economic program to save the country. They invented unemployment insurance. Right? It was the Communist Party that invented unemployment insurance. It was in their 1932 presidential campaign. They didn't call for destroying the country. They called for creating unemployment insurance, an unemployment relief bill that they proposed. And they got members of Congress to propose it. And they had hunger marches with thousands of people who would go to Washington, D.C. And they had the unemployment relief bill. And Roosevelt ended up passing that in 1937 during the Great Depression. Well, back then you could have said the same thing. Why are you trying to save the country? We don't need unemployment insurance. We need a revolution. Well, that is the difference between the new left and the old left, right? And the National Caucus of Labor Committees was led by this old guy, Lyndon LaRouche, and he at least understood, even though he eventually stopped being a Marxist, he understood that you cannot organize any mass movement on the basis of wanting to destroy the country. But the new left, McCarthyism had come and destroyed the old Communist Party, and the new left, the boomers, had grown up in the atmosphere where communists were the devil. And then they didn't like the conformity of U.S. society. They didn't like the militarism. They didn't like the mandatory patriotism, pledging allegiance, fighting in Vietnam. So their way to rebel against imposed social conformity and social norms was to embrace the devil. They thought communism was the devil. And so they embraced the devil. Well, the Communist Party USA, back when they were a strong organization, they did not think of themselves as the devil. But the baby boomers internalized the mindset of McCarthyism, and they thought of communism as the devil. The Rolling Stones, right? They had their album. I actually like their album. The Rolling Stones, they have an album called Beggar's Banquet. Dan Niswander, he's our expert on like classic rock. He knows it. I bet Dan Niswander knows more about that album than I do. But the album that the Rolling Stones put out in, I think, 1968, 69, at the height of their radical period, right? They put out an album called Beggar's Banquet, right? I'll put the image of it on the screen, right? And this is the big album of the Rolling Stones. And I mean, even the cover, I forgot that this was the cover, but it's like, yeah, I mean, even the cover just tells you something, it's like, what in the world, what kind of aesthetic is this? But let me pull it up here. Sorry, I want to get a better image of it here, but it has a toilet on the cover of it. All right. Like right there, like what? Right. But the Rolling Stones put out this album called Beggar's Banquet, which is a great album. Dan is right. It is a great album. And on the album, there are three like communist songs on the album. This was at the height of the period. This was the height of the period where the Rolling Stones were communists, right? They were hanging out in communist circles. And so they put out this album with a toilet on the cover, right? And graffiti. And there's a song on the album called Street Fighting Man, which I really liked, but it's very much a song about libidinal release, right? It's about getting your anger out, right? And it's it's like the joy of libidinal release, and it's Street Fighting Man. It's like, let me see if I can find a version of Street Fighting Man I can play on here. Wow, I didn't think I was going to start talking about the Rolling Stones tonight, but that shows you these streams take on a life of their own, and they're the best when they take on the life of their own. When I come on here with a big plan, it's not always as good as when I just start talking. But anyway, let's do Street Fighting Man. Let's see if I can have a cover of Street Fighting Man by the Rolling Stones, a version I can play on here. I can't play the original version on here, obviously. Let me see if I can find a version of Street Fighting Man that I can play on here. Scrolling. Fighting Man. It's a fun song. And it's about getting your anger out. It's about like having a riot. And I remember I have a particularly emotional attachment to this song because when I was a senior in high school, I went to go see the movie V for Vendetta, which is still to this day one of my favorite movies. And the credits, the end of V for Vendetta, it's about this oppressive authoritarian regime that's like oppressing people and killing all the Muslims and killing all the gay people and faking terrorist attacks. It's an attack on the Bush administration more than anything. It's based on a comic book from the 1980s. And at the end of the movie, the parliament blows up and all the people that have been martyred fighting for freedom are like seen in the crowd of people as they take their masks off. And then the credits come up and they play Street Fighting Man. And so I have a particular attachment to it. I'm telling you that these things are all very complicated. But anyway, this is Street Fighting. This is Street Fighting Man. This is somebody playing the Rolling Stones' Street Fighting Man. Well, it's not a very good version of that song, but you get the idea. The way the Rolling Stones did it, it's a little bit more, glorious. It's like the recording is a little cleaner. It's like that's kind of a sloppy hard rock there version of it. Maybe I can find another thing of it. But that album, that song, Street Fighting Man, if you read the lyrics, though, there's nothing really political about it. It's just kind of like the joy of fighting, right? There's really not, it's not some kind of deep, deep political message. Here, I'll see if this version of it might be slightly better. It might be a little bit cleaner. But maybe not, right? Because I see a lot of people who just play this with a guitar, but you can't. Yeah.
Fear boy, 'cause summer's here and the time is right for fighting in the street, boy. Well, now what can a poor boy do? Set the scene for rock and roll band, 'cause in sleepy London town there's just no place for Street Fighter Man. Right for a palace revolution, but where I live the game to play is compromise solution. Well, now what set to sing for a rock and roll band. Cause we sleep in London town, there's just no place for Street Fighter Man. No. Hey, so my name is called Disturbance. I'll shout and scream, I'll kill the king, I'll wail at all his servants. Well, now what can a poor boy do? Set the same for rock and roll band. Cause we sleep in London town, there's just no place for Street Fighter Man. Oh.
Anyway, so that's Street Fighting Man. And I love that song on some level because it felt very liberating at the end of V for Vendetta. But if you really listen to it, it's not that political. But the song that I was actually referring to, when I started talking about communism being the devil, the song that I'm referring to is there's a song on that album, on Beggar's Banquet. It's called Sympathy for the Devil. That is actually what it's called. And it's like arguing, if you really read the lyrics, it's basically arguing that humans deep down are evil, right? It's basically what it's arguing. And then the closing track of the Rolling Stones' Beggar's Banquet album is a song called Salt of the Earth, which you would think is a Marxist song, right? Because it's about the working class, but it's actually just kind of depressed, right? It's just kind of like there's no hope and the bulk of the population are kind of hopeless. And, you know, that album, so this song, Sympathy for the Devil, which I'm about to play, well, I'll tell you about it later, but it's like, the Rolling Stones were very much close to communist groups when they made Beggar's Banquet, the album. I'll tell you more about that in a second, but let's listen to Sympathy for the Devil.
To introduce myself, I'm a man of wealth and taste. I've been around for a long, long year. So many romance, soul and faith. I was around when Jesus Christ had his moment of doubt and pain. I made them sure that Pilate washed his hands and seal his fate. Pleased to meet you. Hope you guessed my name. But what puzzling you is the nature of my game. I stuck around St. Petersburg when I saw it was time for a change. I killed the Tsar and his ministers, and the station screamed in vain. I rode a tank and the generals rang when the blitzkrieg raged and the bodies sang. Pleased to meet you. Hope you get money. Oh yeah. Well, what puzzling you is the nature of my game. I watch the glee while your kings and queens walk on tender cakes for the golden age. I shouted out who killed the Kennedy, when after all it was you and me. So let me please introduce myself. I'm a man of wealth and taste.
So that's a song called Sympathy for the Devil. So they had one song about rioting and Street Fighting Man, about the libidinal release of rioting. It took the words out of my mouth, Paul. And then the next song they had, the other song on the album, is called Sympathy for the Devil. They hired a Maoist communist to make a version of the film. Jean-Luc Godard, who was a Maoist communist. He was in one of the Maoist communist sects. He was a French filmmaker. Jean-Luc Godard, who worked with Jane Fonda, personal friend of Jane Fonda. He made these like very artistic Maoist communist films during these years. He was from France, and he made a film that I really kind of enjoyed called Tout va bien. Jean-Luc Godard, they hired him to make the movie version of Sympathy for the Devil. And if you watch the movie version of Sympathy for the Devil, it has all these like odd little skits in it. You should go watch it. And it's the Rolling Stones recording the song, right? And it's the actual studio sessions of the Rolling Stones recording that song, with these odd like political sketches. One of the political sketches is a group of Black Panthers have kidnapped a white woman, and they're in a junkyard full of old cars, and they're reading Soul on Ice out loud to her. Another one is that there's a store that sells pornography. And when people come into the store to buy the pornography, before they buy it, there's a couple hippies that are chained in a corner that say stop the war in Vietnam and have like anti-war stuff. And they're like chained up in a corner. And before you buy the pornography, you have to slap the hippies, and it's like talking about consumerism and exploitation or something. I mean, and the film it's like a Maoist communist film about, and it's just, and then it ends. Apparently Jean-Luc Godard, the filmmaker, didn't want to include the full version of the song in the movie, but they forced him to, when the credits come up, play the actual full recorded version of Sympathy for the Devil. But it has the studio sessions of just the Rolling Stones recording it, mixed in with all these like weird kind of communist sketches. So that's how into communism the Rolling Stones were in these years. The fact that they found a Maoist communist filmmaker and made this like weird new wave artistic communist film about them recording the song. But anyway, and then the closing track of the album is the song that everyone says is the most Marxist song on Beggar's Banquet. And I will play a version of that song on here too. It's called Salt of the Earth, which again, I like all three of these songs. All three of these songs are great songs, right? This is all great art, but we can still critique the political line. So continue.
Let's drink to the hard-working people. Let's drink to the lowly of birth. Raise your glass to the good and the evil. Let's drink to the soul of the earth. Say a prayer for the common soldier. Spare a thought for his back-turned work. Say a prayer for his wife and his children. Burn the fires and still till the earth. When I search a faceless crowd, swirling my song grays and black and white, they don't look real to me. In fact, they look so strange. Raise your glass to the hard-working people. Let's drink to the uncounted head. Let's think of the wavering millions who need leaders but got gamblers instead. Spare a thought for the stay-at-home voter. His empty eyes gate at strange beauty shows, and our parade of grace. When I look in the faceless crowd, swirling my soft grays, blacks and whites, they don't look real to me. Oh no, they look so strange. Let's drink to the hard-working people. Let's think of the lowly of birth. Spare a thought for the ragtaggy people. Let's drink to the salt of the earth. Let's drink to the hard-working people. Let's drink to the salt of the earth. Let's drink to the 2,000 millions. Let's think of the homeborn of birth.
Anyway, so you know, that song, people look at it and they say, okay, this is about the working class, right? It's about the hardworking people and how they're left behind and all that. But if you listen to the lyrics, not exactly, right? What's the big line? When I search a faceless crowd, a chilling mass of gray and black and white, they don't look real to me. They just look so strange. There's kind of contempt there. It's not looking, it's almost feeling sorry for the working class. Like they're just this, ugh, you know what I mean? They're just kind of, you know, they're uninteresting, gray and black and white, and they don't look real to me. They just look so strange. I mean, it's almost like we feel sorry for the working class, but we don't really love them. We certainly don't see them as the saviors of humanity. I mean, it's not, this isn't really Marxism. And that's kind of what I'm getting at, right? Beggar's Banquet, that album, you know, even though they hired a communist filmmaker to make the movie of it, and even though, you know, even though it was very probably inspired by a lot of the communist activism that was happening back then, it's pessimistic. It's about the libidinal release of rioting. It is about sympathy for the devil, right? That human beings deep down have, you know, Satan is just humanity, right? There's no, you know, that, you know, it goes over these, all these, you know, wrote, you know, the Russian Revolution and Hitler and the 100 Years War and all of that. It's all just human beings deep down are Satan. And, you know, it's a really hard time for the working class, this mess of gray and black and white, but, you know, they're not so good. It's actually not that different from another Rolling Stones song from another album called Paint It Black, which is just like, I look at the world and I have contempt for the world. It's actually a pretty dark, pessimistic message. Now, I did want to talk about the name of the song, though. And this is very interesting. So the name of the song is Salt of the Earth. Now, what is that from? Well, for those of you who may not be familiar, that comes from the New Testament. That's from the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus Christ says to his followers, you are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its savor, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled by men. Right? And that's, you know, the Sermon on the Mount, which is considered probably the most important text in Christianity. You know, it has, you know, Jesus tells the audience, he says, you are the light. What does he say? You are the light of the world. He says, you are the light of the world. But a light, you can't hide a light, right? It's gotta be shown, right? You know, and, you know, and then he says, you are the salt of the earth, but if you lose your saltiness, what's the point of being salt anymore? And he's making that point. So then during McCarthyism, and this is very interesting. So during McCarthyism in the 1950s, there was the Hollywood 10. There were 10 screenwriters who were Communist Party members. These guys, I'll put them on the screen. And the Hollywood 10, these were 10 guys that were members of the Communist Party, and they were called before Congress, and they were supposed to turn in all of their comrades and name names. and they refused to name names. And so they went to prison for contempt of Congress. They got 2-year prison sentences. And they went to federal prison for refusing to name names. And they were all banned from working in Hollywood. They were all blacklisted. So they pooled all of their money, all these 10 guys. They were screenwriters, which is a pretty good paying job, especially back in the 1950s. That was, these guys were millionaires, but they got called before Congress to name names, and they refused to turn in their comrades. So they were all, they went to prison for contempt of Congress. They pooled all their money, and they made a movie called The Salt of the Earth, which is about Chicano miners. Right? It's a movie about Chicano miners, who are organizing a union, and it's called The Salt of the Earth. And I'll put the trailer on for you. And it's a low budget film made by mostly volunteer actors from a communist controlled union out in I think New Mexico or Arizona, and the actors were primarily Chicano Americans who they volunteered to make this movie to promote the labor union and promote the rights of the workers. And they pooled all their money to make this low budget movie, which is actually really good if you get a chance to watch. I'm just going to put the trailer on. This is Salt of the Earth, the 1954 movie. Okay, hold on. All right. Salt of the Earth. Here we go. All right.
My name is Esperanza Quintero. I am a miner's wife. 18 years my husband has given to that mine, living half his life with dynamite and darkness.
Miner wants to get his brothers out in one piece.
You work alone, savvy? You can't handle the job, I'll find someone who can.
Who, a scab?
An American.
We gotta get equality on the job. Then we'll work on these other things. Leave it to the men.
I see. The men. Your strike may be for your demands, but what wives want, that comes later, always later.
Now, don't you start talking against the union again.
All the next week, I kept thinking about my mañanita. I had never had so nice a party. It was like a sun running through my mind.
La unidad de todos los hombres trabajadores.
Much like any other strike. There would be no settlement, the company said, till the men returned to their jobs. Coffee.
Ramon, listen to me.
For the love of God.
You! I'd expect it of an Anglo, yes.
Ramon, I'm in
but
jail.
you,
I had to get a job.
you, Judas. Black sucker.
Ramon, my kids.
Tú, traidor a tu gente, rompehuelgas,
My kids don't have enough to
desgraciado.
eat.
You think my kids have enough to eat, you rat?
I know it's wrong. Just let me go. I live down. Just let me go.
It's only fair if the women be allowed to vote. Especially if they have to do the job. Women who had nothing to do with the strike. Somehow they heard about the women's picket line, and they came.
Standing by the water, we shall not be moved. Queremos baños, queremos baños, queremos comida, queremos baños, queremos comida, queremos baños, queremos comida, queremos baños,
They ran away. With Ramon, it's pride. I spoke out of the bitterness in me.
and he was hurt.
But anyway, that's The Salt of the Earth, classic movie created by blacklisted communist filmmakers. That's probably why the Rolling Stones called their supposedly Marxist song The Salt of the Earth, right? It's the biblical allusion, but then it was used by communist filmmakers, to make this communist film that was kind of famous during McCarthyism. It was like the Blacklist film. So, that's probably why. But my point is that when the National Caucus of Labor Committees is confronted by Maoists who say to them, why do you want to save the system? It's because, they may be reading the same books as the National Caucus of Labor Committees. They may be reading the same Marx. They may be reading the same Lenin or Mao. But the Maoists are listening to Beggar's Banquet. And Beggar's Banquet, you listen to that, and it is all about tear it down. And it does have kind of contempt for the working class. And it does see communism as identifying with the inner Satan within the people. And that, the National Caucus of Labor Committees, those people were adamant, followers of LaRouche still are, that you should only listen to classical music. Now, I don't go that far. But they very much feel that rock music and the New Left and all that is bad for your brain and causes mental illness, causes depression, and that you should only listen to classical music. And so they were listening to Beethoven and Bach, and they were reading Marx as how do we mobilize the working class to fight for a whole new world. Whereas, the Maoists were listening to Beggar's Banquet, and they heard Marx as how do we create the big explosion, right? How do we kill the king and rail at all his servants, and that there was a subtle difference between the old left and the new left, that when people are in extreme conditions, when the system breaks down and people are really, really suffering, they don't want someone to come along and say, be angry. I'll create chaos and let all your anger out. No, they don't want that. What they want is somebody who can offer a real solution. That's what they want. And that's what real communist groups that have a real base among the population, that's what they do. And they bring people together to build things, to build a mass movement, to construct, that's what they do. And when communism is just a form of intellectual entertainment, it's something very, very different. Look, the closest thing to a real communist group that we have in America, despite my political disagreements with them, is the Uhuru movement, who's on trial, right? We're waiting for the verdict, for their 3 leaders. There's a reason the U.S. government targeted them. They're builders, right? Their African national fight song, every line in it is, we are winning. It's all optimism. It's all about starting businesses, they're builders, right? They're communists. They're anti-imperialists. They study anti-imperialism, but it's all about building. And it's not libidinal release. And it's not Beggar's Banquet. And so, they are not the kind of people that would have gone up to the National Caucus of Labor Committees and said, why are you always trying to fix things? They wouldn't have said that. They would have got it because they're trying to fix things in their own community.